You'd think the story of the Titanic submersible and attempts to rescue its crew would be one of the few things that could unite people behind a common cause. Yeah, fat chance. It's been dragged kicking and screaming into the culture war like everything else. We now learn that the company's drive for diversity may have jeopardized the safety of the vessel. OceanGate CEO Stockton Rush gave an interview in which he asserted that he didn't want to continue hiring a bunch of 50-year-old white guys because this wouldn't be inspirational.
There are other sub-operators out there, but they typically have gentlemen who are ex-military submariners, and you'll see a whole bunch of 50-year-old white guys. I wanted our team to be younger, to be inspirational.
Some of these hirings related directly to safety and risk assessment.
Is related to safety and some of the preponderance of checklists, things we do for risk assessments.
Stockton even said anybody can drive the sub with a $30 video game controller. The chilling irony behind these statements is that one of those 50-year-old white guys, former OceanGate Director of Marine Operations David Lockridge, was fired in 2018 for blowing the whistle on safety issues. The report detailed numerous issues that posed serious safety concerns. These included Lockridge's worry that visible flaws in the carbon fiber supply to OceanGate raised the risk of small flaws expanding into larger tears during pressure cycling. These concerns were all communicated to OceanGate's senior management, including CEO Stockton Rush, who is on board the vessel. So which inspirational candidates got hired instead of those 50-year-old white guys? Well, at least one of them is a young female TikToker who shared the final video of the vessel's descent. She was hired last month.
Because I'm joining this company that does submarine trips down to the Titanic. I could cry thinking about this, but stay the fuck tuned.
Quickly got to work convincing her, quote, straight-ass co-worker to visit a drag queen show while at port.
Somehow convinced my straight-ass co-worker to go to a drag show while we're at port for less than 12 hours.
For this beautiful... Inspirational. Another tweet celebrating the company's diversity hiring policy excluded men altogether. Yeah, maybe they should have hired more 50-year-old white guys.
A whole bunch of 50-year-old white guys.
Oh yeah, and by the way, they've been squeezing older white guys out of air traffic control since 2014. Now there's an alarming rise in near-miss incidents. Just a coincidence, I'm sure.
A lot of crazy stories this week. Obviously, there's the whole submarine situation seems to be, well, that's something we're just going to have to dive into, but I want to play a number of clips around it to kind of give some, give some hint to what might have been the background or what's going on in the background while the Navy knew for nearly a week that it had imploded, most likely, and refused to tell any.
Well, there's also the diversity story that they kind of dangled out there, and they're like, well, maybe the people that were forced to work there weren't qualified anymore.
Sure.
And maybe the people that were qualified, that because of racism these days, their skin color was the wrong color, and they were no longer qualified because of their skin color, which I always thought was racism itself. The things you can't control about yourself, we weren't supposed to judge each other on, but now it's like it's in vogue. That's what we do now.
And it's a complex situation because it's hard to know whether or not he was really operating on the woke culture thing or if he was hiding behind it because he fired that one expert. I forget when, in regards to him warning about lack of regulation, lack of safety procedures being, observed, all these different things. And so a lot of people are saying it's not so much that he was observing the woke culture, it's just that he didn't want these old professional individuals telling him what he can and can't do. So he hid behind it to act like, okay, I don't want the guys telling me I can't do it. I'll just get all the yes people and hide behind woke culture to say it's okay to do it and not have any, real sort of oversight, regulations in place, making sure they have any certifications as a part of those regulations, so forth and so on. So and hiding behind the facade of woke, because he's also apparently supposedly gave to Trump or something. So it's like, is he really a woke guy? Or was he hiding behind that because he didn't want guys who knew what they were doing, not telling him what he can and can't do? It's a big damn mess. And then, of course, there's the conspiracy. I mean, I could tell you this, the normie crowd interested all of a sudden in the wreck of the Titan, or I think that was the name of the book, or the book called The Titan, because obviously the name of it. And in
1898, The Wreck of the Titan was a book by Morgan Williamson or something like that. And it tells the story of the world's biggest ship. And Morgan Robertson, 1898-ish. So over a decade before the Titanic. And in there, if you read the first chapter, it's the biggest ship that's ever been built. It's unsinkable. It was not called the Titanic. It was called Titan, right? Or something.
Yeah,
It's
Titan.
called the Wreck of the Titan.
Yeah.
So
the Titan. That's what it's called.
It's almost as if somebody who owned the White Star shipping lines insurance company had read that book and thought, wow, we could cash in, and if they had damaged one of their ships, maybe they could cash in on that insurance fraud. I'm not saying that's what happened, but such things might occur in history every now and then.
And we can entertain that. There's a couple of good videos.
And JP Morgan was on that ship and he got off. So like just them going down to see the thing that was the thing, and then they make another thing of that because, right?
And the sister ship Olympia.
James Cameron shows everyone,
damaged.
oh, here's the Titanic.
Right. Yeah.
Well, there was 3 ships, kids. There's the Olympic, the Britannic, and the Titanic, and they're all identical except for the number of portholes and then the accoutrements. They were outfitted differently. 2 of them, like one was a male steamship liner, and one was a something, other ship. I don't know what they used it for.
There were different
variations.
variations.
And the Titanic was outfitted with all the nice stuff, but on one of those ships got damaged in New York Harbor by a drunk captain, and they couldn't claim the insurance on it.
Right.
The Olympic. So
That's
then they can't cash in on the Olympic. So the theory goes with some people who know how to read that they switched the Olympic and the Titanic, and that Titanic made its way through the rest of its life as the Britannic, and they switched the names on it. And some people debunk that, and some people think it's interesting. I'm not telling you what to think. I'm just telling you 1898 Morgan Robertson, Wreck of the Titan, or Futility is what is. It's a historical artifact. It's interesting.
It's certainly interesting. It's a bit of synchronicity, no doubt. The world's great first modern insurance fraud, we can call it that, if it indeed happened that way. William T Stead was on the ship, as well as I think some of the and there were many individuals supposedly on the ship that were against the Federal
John
Reserve
Jacob
Act
Astor was on the ship.
Yeah, Astor. Yeah, sure.
Yes,
that were essentially potentially going to stage a coup. Stage a coup. Like they're going to go against essentially.
Well, William T Stead,
Federal Reserve Act,
being on the Titanic is interesting because he was the conspirator of Cecil Rhodes. It's William T Stead and Cecil Rhodes that come up with this whole idea to bring America back into the British Empire and to take over the world. And then they wrote it down, and Stead says that he's his conspirator, that Rhodes and I conspired to come up with this idea. He literally uses language like that.
Yep.
However, that's 1902 when Rhodes dies. And then he starts to see how the legacy unfolds after Rhodes leaves. And he might have felt, hey, this is not what Rhodes wanted, or maybe it's exactly what Rhodes wanted and Stead didn't anticipate.
All right.
In any case, Stead meets his demise on the Titanic, and there's a plaque dedicated to William T Stead, a British journalist in Central Park, New York, which I always thought was interesting as well.
Very strange.
So
not sure
there's
any Americans.
A strong Anglo-American establishment. The Astor family, John Jacob Astor the fourth, I think, is the one that died on the Titanic, and they're from the German Astor family. There's also a British Astor family, and they used to be in the fur trade back in the day. But what they did with the furs was they took them over to China and they traded them for opium. And so all those big, Waldorf Astoria, that's like built with opium money and Chinese labor. That's the history of that. So when one looks at like the Astor who got killed on the Titanic, not all these families agree politically on their moves.
Correct.
And John Jacob Astor, the American, might have disagreed with the Astor that's over in the Cliveden set or whatever, Lady Astor. And they're just like, tell him to take the ship, and they had JP Morgan get on for the first 2 stops. And then before it goes transatlantic, he gets off, but he's used to get a lot of these people on the ship as bait. Like you can, Morgan wants a meeting with you, meet him on Titanic. You guys are going on the
and it was I think he somehow owned the ships in some capacity. Like the claim of insurance fraud ties back to JP Morgan specifically.
Yes, the White Star Line was a JP Morgan company. And then the question was who held the insurance notes on that, and
correct.
And who got paid, and how that all work out. And did they go out of business because they ruined a ship with a drunk captain? No, they didn't. The White Star Line was in there a pretty long time. Now, I do have an artifact. I think Dylan has it at his farm, but Gatto had a White Star Line big culinary cooking pan, and it was made of copper, and it was really heavy. Wow. And it says White Star Line on it. So I think now they use it to make cider or something at the farm. But the White Star Line was the thing back in the day. It's like if you were on the Concorde, right, 20 years ago. It's that type of level of service, and there was only a couple of those steamship companies that served the highest level of clients, like Titanic aimed to serve. But then again, who thought we're going to make this ship and build it just like the Titan? Like, they weren't even original. They couldn't even come up with like a different name. Titanic. Titanic. Yeah, there you go. And then, well, that's the name now. And we're just going to go with that. And there was no libraries back then probably carrying that book, because they're like, it's an obscure book. That guy
it's
didn't
an obscure
really
book.
get
And I mean,
so
if anyone had it, it might have been like the gentrified population at the time. I would imagine would be the only people probably even aware of that, such a book like that. So
yeah, and they're not going to say anything because they're living on the opium money.
Exactly.
So it's an interesting artifact. I was incredulous when I heard about it. I heard someone talk about this. I was like, that's bullshit. There's no way that someone wrote the story like the Titanic, like down to that detail. And it was before Titanic. Like, you know, they had those memes of Donald Trump. And it's like, oh, the Simpsons produced like these prophecies that Donald Trump was going to be president. But if you dig in, they got the dates of the episodes wrong. And it's very simple to debunk. But a lot of people think, I mean, Simpsons are predictive programming, yes, but let's not go further than what they're actually doing, I guess would be the point.
Yeah.
But then there's Baron Trump, Adventures of Baron Trump. I was incredulous about that, but apparently that's real books back in the day. Ingersoll Rand, or whatever his name was. Ingersoll Lockwood, something like that. Time traveling Trumps, just like H.G. Wells.
It's very strange. Yeah, I mean, the original novel looks like was called Futility, a novella written by Morgan Robertson and published first during 1898. It supposedly was then revised to the Wreck of the Titan. So it's for, I guess they changed the name from Futility to the Wreck of the Titan in 1912, which is really strange. That's right before, isn't that the year that when did the Wreck of the Titanic happen? 1912. That's weird. So it features a fictional British ocean liner named Titan that sinks in the North Atlantic Ocean after striking an iceberg. And the Titan and its sinking are famous for similarities to the passenger ship RMS Titanic and its sinking 14 years earlier. After the sinking, but remember, there was a revision that happened the year of the sinking. It's very strange. This could be an exercise in the patternicity fallacy. Oh, did we lose your mic?
Oh, no, I was talking to the audience because we're still getting stuff set up over there. So I'm sorry if I distract you. Please,
I was just making sure.
The futility.
It's strange.
The futility of the futility.
It's strange.
It's only a good story if you're trying to commit an insurance fraud. Who else would try to emulate it?
Right. And there's also, there's some speculation about, that's a year before, obviously, the Federal Reserve Act. I've seen a bunch of different people throw a bunch of different conspiracies. It could be an exercise in apophenia or patternicity fallacy, or it could, just be people that are in the know paying homage to the fact that this is, sort of a wink to a synchronous wink, if you will, to events of the past that they sort of pay forward in history as ways they still emulate and utilize the similar strategies to do the same things today. So nonetheless, obviously that was a big synchronicity this week with the Titan, and the tragedy of it imploding. Obviously there's a whole woke narrative and the fact that he was buying things from an outdoor company, and then also using a video game controller. They're using a carbon fiber with titanium bond, which is not stable, and with all the cycling and the what they call it, fatigue cycling.
Well, they fired the whistleblower that blew the, he said there's cracks in the carbon fiber and this is not fit.
That's part of this.
Like, you're fired. Cycle. I'm like, yeah, that's what happens.
Yeah. And then they said, oh, we need to be inspirational and hire young people, and hid behind sort of the woke narratives, knowing he can probably get away with that in the culture, and people would applaud him instead of looking behind to see if there's anything really substantial there as far as safety is concerned. So it's an unfortunate and tragic situation, but it's also one of the situations where it could win a Darwin Award for how foolish this individual was, and how much he evaded any sort of accountability in regards to people criticizing the safety and the structure and the materials that were used and the way it was put together and all this sort of stuff. So very tragic, very foolish. But at the same time, the fact that the Navy allowed this to go on for 4 or 5 days, well, we can dive into that.
The saga of the disappearing submarine ended yesterday with the unfortunate revelation by the US Coast Guard that a remote vehicle had found debris from the vessel. Officials said the discovery was, quote, consistent with a catastrophic explosion. But now questions are being asked about when it was known the vessel imploded. The Wall Street Journal reported that a top-secret military acoustic detection system designed to spot enemy submarines first heard what the US Navy suspected was the Titan submersible implosion hours after the submersible began its voyage. The fact that it most likely imploded on Sunday was immediately shared with the incident commander, leading some to assert that the Biden administration knew the sub had been destroyed days beforehand, with Zero Hedge accusing the White House of letting everyone think the passengers were alive. All week, the media ran with the narrative that the occupants were running out of oxygen, but there was still time to rescue them. This included reports of banging sounds being detected in the area where the vessel went missing, but most experts were almost certain from a very early stage that all that was never the case. In an interview with the BBC, James Cameron said that by Monday morning, he was almost certain that the vessel had already imploded, over 3 days before that likelihood was made public, due to information that he'd received from experts within the submersible community.
Within about an hour, I had the following facts. They were on descent. They were at 3,500 meters, heading for the bottom at 3,800 meters. Comms were lost and navigation was lost. And I said instantly, you can't lose comms and navigation together without an extreme catastrophic event, a highly energetic catastrophic event. And the first thing that popped to mind was an implosion. So I felt in my bones what had happened.
Cameron went on to suggest that the whole narrative we heard throughout the week that the crew might still be alive was a farce.
This entire week has just felt like a prolonged nightmarish charade where people are running around talking about banging noises and talking about oxygen and all this other stuff, and their Coast Guard is out with airplanes. I knew that sub was sitting exactly underneath its last known depth and position.
It's also been revealed that a British firm offered to help with the search and rescue on Monday, using a vehicle that could plunge further depths than any other, but the Americans refused to give them permission. Some have suggested that the Biden administration used the saga as a distraction op to shift attention from certain other news stories. Meanwhile, former Royal Navy submarine captain Ryan Ramsey said that the rather haphazard way the Titan was built led to its implosion. I would say disregarding standard ways of building these types of submersible in pursuit of innovation has huge elements of risk, and in this case that risk has been realized in the loss of people's lives. The company has faced continual accusations of cutting corners on safety after it was revealed that CEO Stockton Rush issued hiring, quote, 50-year-old white guys to work on the vessel.
What makes the Grand Theft World podcast unique, invigorating, exciting, and informative? Most other podcasts out there are either doing straight up interviews or they're just covering the daily news. They're covering current events from the day they happened. And that is effective. It's useful. It's a great starting point. And then sometimes these current events change during the week past the first story. So we like to give it a little time. You have to wait till some of the dust settles on these stories in order to give them accurate coverage. And the other thing that's really missing in the media landscape is covering the articles that are coming out every day. That's great. That's necessary. But who's bringing in contextual history so that you can understand what has been going on for decades and decades to lead up to the machinations and actions that we see unfolding today? So what we do here on the podcast is we cover current events. Many of these things are censored, but we wait about a week. As a forensic historian, I focused mainly through my career on the history of globalism and collectivism and things that they call maybe the New World Order. There's a lot of facts to these sort of circumstances, groups, events, activities, working groups that they've had over time. So for Grand Theft World listeners, we not only break down the current events, most of which that are censored during the week, we provide you with contextual history, we give you the source notes, the references, we do deep dives, and this really empowers you with an understanding of context and history so that you can make more informed decisions in your life. There's also a community, a membership where you guys can actually ask questions. We can get in the show and share evidence. And there's a town hall weekly for Grand Theft World for those who listen to it and are interested in covering the stories that we don't get to during a 6-hour show. Listening to it an hour a day, you could easily consume the week's news, but you're going to have substance and meaning and context and understanding. And with that, you can make higher quality decisions in your life. So if you're interested in more quality in your life, go to grandtheftworld.com, click podcast at the top, and we'll see you there. Thank you.
These allegations are false.
This isn't Grand Theft Auto, folks. This isn't a video game.
What are the most surprising things that you discovered once you started pulling on that thread? Who he was connected to, what institutions he was influential over, what events he participated in?
Come on, man. What are we talking about? Come on, man. No. You don't have to think about it, dude.
I got this quote because you said you didn't know much about Klaus Schwab. I made it my job to, as soon as this happened, I'm like, okay, this guy's their front man. Let me learn about the official history of the World Economic Forum. I got their 40-year history. I got every book that Klaus Schwab has written or ghostwritten. I went through those books. This is one of the most interesting passages.
Come on, man.